Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Push the Point. Today, I am joined by Shahmir. We're going to be talking through Shahmir's Uzuri Blitz deck. I'll get Shahmir to introduce himself in a second. But before we kick off, just wanted to, again, talk about Living Realms, who are the partner of Push the Point. One of the premier Push the Point stores in the UK, organizer of many of the premier events that take place within the UK, including the Calling Birmingham, which is coming up. If you join the Push the Point patron scheme, you get a 5% discount on the Living Realm store. That includes Blitz decks, boxes, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be Flesh and Blood product either. It can be anything on the store. So huge thank you to Living Realms for partnering with us. But let's move on and talk about Uzuri. And we've brought on Shahmir. Shahmir, Pro Tour semi-finalist. You've been on the channel before, but introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi folks, I'm Shahmir. I'm a Flesh and Blood player living in London at the moment, and I've had a few good runs around the place. The Pro Tour semi-final was a big deal, but on top of that, doing well through multiple ProQuest seasons, attending the upcoming Pro Tour in Baltimore, and having a great time at Skirmish with the Uzuri list. So
I think Skirmish is really, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like the Blitz meta at the moment is pretty good. It's pretty fun and pretty interesting, and you've come up with a really interesting build here that we're going to talk through today.
Yeah, it's definitely got a lot of stuff kind of going on in the meta game. We are seeing some decks kind of emerge to dominance of sorts, but that's not to say that there's not counterplay to those decks. In fact, we are seeing like some reactionary decks like Prism really kind of pop up to kind of tackle the meta game, and that's always exciting to see.
So tell me about how you kind of came to Uzuri in the first place. Why did you decide to essentially build an Uzuri deck? What was it about the hero that attracted you?
So when Uzuri was first spoiled, we were all really, honestly, I was very medium on her. I was like, I don't know, she's not really doing anything that like pushes numbers up or anything. That doesn't seem so great. But the moment we actually started testing her for Classic Constructed, it's like, oh, there's power to this whole hidden information game, to this kind of like switcheroo mechanic. And I just loved the way that she played. I'd always loved the kind of hidden information aspect of Flesh and Blood. And I found Dorinthia a bit too repetitive for me to really want to do that. Uzuri feels like Dorinthia, but instead of just attacking with a weapon every turn, you're getting to play your cards, and then you smile at your opponent saying, this could be anything. I don't know, it might just be what's on the table. So we wanted to kind of see how well that kind of strategy translates down to Blitz, where the format is a lot faster. And I think it generally translates pretty well, which was really exciting to see. Obviously, there's lots of changes that you can make for your individual metagame, but the result we came up with tackled what we have right now pretty well, I think. I was pretty happy with how it performed. Yeah,
you've had some decent results with it. I if you just want to talk through, because you've been playing the deck, and also a few of your friends, a few of the others in the London community have been playing it too. And they've been having success with it, right? I think that's pretty fair to say at the skirmishes.
Indeed, yep. So I played it for the first time in an in-person event at Rule Zero's skirmish just over a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, and got the win with that, which was really exciting. I lost to Kano in that tournament and drew against an Iris Prism deck, but otherwise cleared the top 8 and won the event. And then in the hands of some of my friends since then, it's achieved top 8s at Wayland Games, at Board in the City down in Southend, and at Darksphere Skirmish just this last weekend. So it feels like the deck's got some legs. It definitely is good at targeting certain metagames, certain decks which I built it to do. But it's done pretty well for itself, I'd say. I'm pleased with that.
So let's actually talk through the deck itself, because we're gonna run through the list that's been doing really well, and afterwards, after we've talked about the actual list itself, what we're going to do is show you a second list, which is sort of what you might want to consider changing up now that I think we know now that Icelander and Oldhim are Living Legend, or they are very, very likely to be Living Legend for the next Blitz.
The next couple of days.
Yeah, we'll find out for sure, but we're going to start to see a lot less ice in the meta, a lot less of those heroes, obviously, because they won't be available. So we're going to show you a few options if you want to change things up when and if Oldhim and Icelander LL out. But Shahmir, if you want to start by just talking through the four pieces of equipment you've got right at the very top. There's obviously a sideboard as well, but if you want to talk through the equipment that we're seeing here: Black Tech, Crown of Providence, Flick Knives, and Tunic.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are kind of probably the most obvious pieces of equipment to start your Uzuri deck with. No surprises seeing Spring Tunic in the chest slot. It is just still one of the most dominant chess pieces in the game. Redback Shroud is maybe an interesting option if we tried to exploit the silver mechanic a bit more, but that's not where I wanted to take this deck, so Tunic was the best choice. There wasn't much of an alternative. Similarly, if we wanted to lean more into contract, we might consider the Mask of Perdition that came out in Dynasty, but otherwise, Crown of Providence is just kind of the staple headpiece in the game, so there's not a lot to say about those other than they're kind of the best in the slot. Flick Knives coming out in Outsiders was a really interesting one. I really wasn't sure how to evaluate it for a long time, other than like, well, we were playing Ironhide and Iron Rot and Goliath Gauntlet before, so this is probably better than those. Turns out it's a lot better than those. Access to the one Blade Break armor is, okay, that's just Iron Rot gloves, that's fine. But this attack reaction is really, really powerful, partly because it is, quote-unquote guaranteed damage that can only be stopped with some kind of damage prevention measure, which is usually pretty inefficient for your opponent to do. And on top of that, we're going to see how it interacts with kind of the use of the daggers down below, which is really, really powerful. And then Black Tech Whisperers, again, kind of like this staple assassin boots, but there is an alternative piece. There is Snapdragon Scalers in the sideboard, and we'll talk about kind of when we wanted to use one and the other. But again, one armor on Black Tech Whisperers and the ability to make your turn a bit wider with kind of this on-hit go-again effect made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think let's quickly scroll down to the sideboard options for the equipment, just so we can cover that all together. And if you want to talk through, I think perhaps just to start with the Null Rune loadout that you've gone with. Obviously, Kano, Icelander at the moment, huge threats in the Blitz meta. So maybe talk through what you landed on in terms of your Null Rune and why you decided to go with these particular pieces, the Lantern, the Gloves, and the Hood.
For sure. So obviously we're in a metagame where Icelander is doing fantastically and Kano is still doing very well. In Blitz, you really can't afford just to stock Arcane Barrier 3 in your sideboard, so a lot of the choices in this list, both in the equipment and in the main deck, were kind of to respect and leverage that ability to use Arcane Barrier 3. In terms of the slots that we decided on, we found that because your resources are so kind of precious for defending your life total in that metagame, and in that matchup rather, and generally as you play Assassin, there's not many times where you're swinging two daggers, unless you really have a full hand. Arcane Lantern was kind of the first piece of Arcane Barrier that we wanted to add, because it was a case of, well, I only really need the one dagger anyway, so this other slot might as well just be a free piece of AB. So it's what we take into kind of Viscerai and things, well, not Viscerai and Blitz, but into Rune Blades if we wanted to take Arcane Barrier 1, Arcane Lantern is where we'd start. And then in terms of the Gloves and the Hood, we wanted to keep the boot slot open so that you can really apply pressure to the wizards, because you can't let the game go really long. All of their really tall arcane damage, like the Voltic Bolts and the Emeritus Scoldings, you can't block them out fully, so you can't let the game drag long enough that they're going to get to see that. So the boots are helpful towards making sure you can actually put pressure on and kill them. Null Rune Hood and Null Rune Gloves are there mainly because Tunic was providing that additional resource to either play through Icelander's Frostbite or give you one more resource to try and survive Kano's big turn. Was really, really impactful compared to Flick Knives and Crown of Providence.
Yeah.
So it just kind of made sense that these were like the three slots that were the most disposable, and we figured, okay, there's our Null Rune.
And in that, you say about putting pressure on against the Wizards, would you be running Snapdragons in those matchups as well, rather than Black Tech?
Because there's not much reason to care about physical block. If you know that the Icelander player is on some kind of hybrid damage build, mixed damage build, where they're playing Scar for Scars or Wounded Bulls, then I could see an argument for Black Tech Whisperers, especially because Icelander isn't going to like confidently block you 100% of the time. But in this metagame, we're seeing Icelander really succeed with these arcane heavy builds, like just really tall arcane, threatening tons of damage on your turn and your opponent's turn. So because of that, we just want Snapdragons for a free, easy activation to give guaranteed go again, even if they decide to block.
It's a pretty good card. let's talk about the alternative knives. So we've got
Mm.
the Orbital Clast and the Scale Peeler. It's the one that makes non-attacks have -1, in for a future attack, and the equipment. So talk a little bit, because I can imagine this being one of the main questions that people have when they're playing Uzuri, like when should I be running 2 Spiders Bite? When should I be running Orbital Clast? When should I be running Scale Peeler? Hell, when should I be running Orbital Clast and Scale Peeler? Like what kind of situations are you seeing where you're bringing these alternative knives in?
So these 4 slots, just to kind of, before we get into the dagger specifically, the 3 daggers and the Snapdragon Scalers, I think are some of the most flexible aspects of the deck. Spider's Bite is just really widely applicable because almost everybody is going to be playing some kind of attack action. So if you're playing into a hero who's primarily dealing physical damage, you're going to want at least Spider's Bite in there, more than likely. But in terms of Scale Peeler, Orbital Clast, Snapdragon Scalers, the kind of curiously missing one here is Nerve Scalpel. And I made the decision there to cut Nerve Scalpel because there's not a lot of defense reactions being played in Blitz, so that kind of covers that side of things. And I wasn't particularly worried about like the warrior matchup or like a lot of warriors appearing in my metagame because Nerve Scalpel also is really effective against attack reactions. But you could definitely make an argument towards that being in the deck, just cutting one of these other slots. And I'll talk about the Scale Peeler and Orbital Clast and why they're there. So Orbital Clast is, again, if we're expecting a really heavy wizard metagame with a lot of non-attack actions, Orbital Clast is the one dagger that you're going to want to take in alongside your Arcane Lantern. It also has a lot of upside into Briar, who's still, doing pretty well. I mean, it's a very capable deck in Blitz. The cards that they're going to be most comfortable blocking with are going to be their non-attack actions after they have an Embodiment of Earth, because they have that buffed up blocking value, and their attack actions are usually quite precious. So Orbital Clast lets you kind of negate the value on the thing that they want to block with most effectively, which is very powerful. And Scale Peeler is really there for heroes who have these massive fridges of armor, which is really common in Blitz, actually. Like you look at Guardians, you look at Rune Blades, you look at Warriors, all of these heroes have access to a lot of armor, which means that on a turn where they really, really want to keep their hand while not being afraid of an on-hit, they can just throw like 3 pieces of Battle Worn 2 equipment in front, and that's 6 block, which is going to be very hard for you to get over the top of. And at that point, you're like, okay, so I didn't get my on-hit, and you've kept 5 cards. I'm about to take a lot of damage here. So Scale Peeler can be really useful for making sure, nope, you're not going to get to use your armor effectively here. Either you're blocking it with a card from your hand, so I'm happy, or with the armor itself, so I'm happy, or it's hitting, and you basically can't block with your armor this turn, so you're blocking with cards from hand, and I'm happy.
I love Scale Peeler. I think we saw on stream a couple of times Scale Peeler really tripping players up, and obviously as they learn more about the card they won't fall into this trap as often, but we've seen things like people blocking with temper equipment, not realizing that essentially just kills the temper equipment. People using Stalagmite with the -1 from Scale Peeler and then the -1 from blocking, and now it's dead and they've lost their second use of Stalagmite. So a really tricksy card if you don't quite understand how that temper mechanic is working. But just like you say, the fridge in Blitz is so impactful, being able to essentially keep a whole hand without dying, or shift tempo in the late game by using your fridge to really get yourself back in the game. And I really like the inclusion here. I mean, as someone that comes up against a lot of heroes with a lot of armor, I wish I maybe I should stop playing Uzuri instead, so that I don't have to worry about this. Just a little bit more on snaps. So you mentioned, these are kind of the flexible slots, but you mentioned that Wizard is where you bring in the snaps in. Are there any other matchups where you just think snaps is going to be as good or is going to be better than the assassin boots that you bring in the Snapdragon Scalers?
Absolutely. The two other matchups rather, where I'm really inclined towards using Snapdragons are Guardians, Oldhim specifically, because Oldhim is very capable of blocking out all of your attacks, and you are under more pressure than he is to actually deal damage, because he'll comfortably go to an end game where he's fatigued you're out of cards, and he's just swinging his hammer every turn, whereas you actually have to run him out of life points. So Snapdragons is really critical for letting your turn go wide and apply more pressure to Oldhim to actually deal enough damage to kill him. And against Prism, who has access to Spectral Shields to really cover up some of the awkward breakpoints that your attacks are designed to be presenting. and you really need to be able to go wide enough, not just to be able to actually deal damage to her, but potentially be swinging a dagger at one of her non-token auras in order to trigger Spectra and get it off the board. Because if you let those stack up, you're going to be in big trouble.
Incredible. Okay, so we have gone through the Blitz sideboard, the equipment sideboard. Let's talk about the main deck. Let's talk about the cards you put in. So if you want to work your way through, starting with, you know, they're all kind of bundled up together, and I kind of feel like with Uzuri, the kind of red, blue, yellow distinction may not make as much sense as it does in other heroes. I don't know how you feel about that, but start with some of the red power cards and talk about how these cards interact, and I guess explain a little bit what Uzuri's hero ability actually does for people that might not be aware.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick recap on what Uzuri does. She basically says, if I attack you with a stealth card, in the reaction step, I can banish a card from my hand face down, so take that card out of my hand, and then when her ability resolves, switch out the card that I banished, so the card from my hand with the card in stealth. So it's kind of like you switcheroo the stealth card that's on the combat chain for a new card that's in your hand. Trouble is, your opponent doesn't know what that card is when they are doing things in the blocking step. So if they don't have defense reactions to try and, you know, cover up whatever it is that you might be doing, chances are they're blocking with completely blind information. Then you go, well, this is what you were actually trying to block, and you usually try and punish them. So with that in mind, we kind of categorize the deck into stealth cards, the things that you want to swap in off stealth cards, the kind of like small suite of reactions that are designed to kind of really make our stealth cards either really hit for lots of damage or kind of ensure that the thing that we swap in gets a lot of damage and are on hits. A small kind of like defensive package to try and keep us alive against some of the more aggressive decks in the format, and then a couple of kind of like ancillary cards that help us go again or otherwise widen the combat chain a bit more. So let's start with kind of the big bonks, as I call them, and these are the things that you want to swap in off of stealth. Command and Conquer. Anyone who's played the game for long enough is no stranger to this card. This is probably one of the most powerful 2-cost attacks in the game. And when your opponent doesn't know they're blocking a Command and Conquer, it tends to be even stronger. You're just coming in and you're saying, oh, I'll attack with this, Infect for 3. It's just 3 damage. You can block it for 3, right? And they block it for 3, and you go, haha, no. I'll hit you for 3 and also destroy your arsenal. So Command and Conquer is a really, really brutal one, particularly because defense reactions can't be played to it. So if your opponent wants to try and play around Command and Conquer, they have to play all of their defense reactions before you even like swap the Command and Conquer into play, which is kind of a big upside for you. And if they don't decide to do that because they're getting a little greedy, I've had lots of people get punished with a Sink Below in their arsenal saying, yeah, you could let your Uzuri resolve. Now I can't react. That's bad. So yeah, CNC, absolutely huge. A lot of the other ones that we're seeing are, well, there's one other card that is not new from Outsiders, and that's Surgical Extraction. This is another one that's like particularly punishing if it hits, because now you get complete information on your opponent's hand and get to take the best card from it and get to take the top card of their deck and hopefully generate some silver while you're at it. The big problem with Surgical before was that you're paying 2 resources for a 4-power attack, which, sure, it's at a break point, but it's very, very predictable. Now, because it is totally unpredictable what exactly you're going to swap in, a lot of people will take the stance of either block 6, in which case you've given me your whole hand, I don't need to Surgical you, or no blocks. And then you go, great, show me your hand, I'll take the best card. So Surgical is also performing really, really strongly in this deck. And then the other kind of big smacks that we're seeing added to the deck are new out of Outsiders. We've got Uzuri's Specialization, Shakedown. And this is kind of like your 3rd and 4th copy of Surgical Extraction in many ways. But it's not quite as strong. You have to put a little bit more work into getting that card out of their hand. Firstly, you have to have activated an attack reaction, this Chain Link, or played an attack reaction, which works really well with Uzuri's ability, because this kind of like keeps checking retroactively if you've activated or played an attack reaction, this Chain Link. So if you play a stealth card, activate Uzuri, banishing Shakedown from your hand, and then Uzuri resolves, you put your Shakedown onto the combat chain, it still has its on-hit ability enabled because it sees that you've activated Uzuri's attack reaction ability this turn. And when it hits, you've got to choose a color this time and banish a card of the chosen color. But a lot of the times, if you're worried about a very aggressive opponent, you're going to be choosing red. If you sometimes want to starve your opponent of resources, you're going to be choosing blue. It's pretty straightforward to kind of figure out what's the type of card that I need to take out of their hand, and you'll choose your color based on that pretty often. And then the last really big one is Death Touch, which we're playing 4 copies of. The Death Touch is just a ridiculously overrate card. It is a 1 for 6, which is already overrate in itself. And on hit, it creates one of these 3 new disease tokens that we've seen come out of Outsiders, which all can be really powerful in themselves. I mean, Bloodrot Pox at minimum is kind of representing 2 damage or taking an entire card out of your opponent's hand. And Frailty and Inertia can both be really, really powerful. Like Inertia off of Death Touch is so powerful into wizards who usually need their arsenal to kind of maintain a kill shot on you. So forcing that arsenal out of them is ridiculously powerful, even more than like the 2 points of damage that you get off of Bloodrot Pox. We're playing the blue ones as well because they are attacking that breakpoint of 4. So in the event that your opponent is blocking for 3, which will happen reasonably often if they're blocking at all, then you still get to sneak 1 damage over the top, get one of these tokens, which can be very high impact, and it's a blue which contributes to our kind of like resource base for the deck. Yeah, so those are our big bonks, as it were.
Yeah, I like the idea of having these assassin cards that you're swapping in as well, because as I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, you do have the shreds in the deck, so you're able to use your attack reacts on those, especially the ones with interesting breakpoints like 4s, and being able to shred a block down by 3 with a yellow shred. Hopefully you're going to be able to secure that on hit. I think that's a really interesting, really like dynamic to put in. There's probably some really interesting and impactful 2-cost generics out there that you could consider, like Humble, for example, is an option.
Humble,
but I quite like the space that you have to play around with. You can just play a shakedown out for 2 if you have to, and then use a shred to get the reaction and the effect on shakedown. And I like the fact you could throw out a surgical without using Uzuri's hero ability, because you've got those. You can use you get your shred value on those cards as well. So I think that's a really interesting line to take by sort of maximizing the number of assassin cards you have to swap in, so you get the increased benefit of your attack reacts that only work on a certain type of card. There was one other I wanted to ask about, which was Leave No Witnesses. Is that so? I think I know how this card is used, but I'm going to ask anyway, which is this a card that you swap in, or are there any other uses that are particularly good with Leave No Witnesses that that the deck is trying to achieve? It's obviously another arsenal destruction card, like CNC, but sort of what's the role of that particular card in the deck?
Yeah, so Leave No Witnesses is kind of a funny one because it does have the on-hit ability that kind of identifies it with a lot of our other big bonk cards, but because it's a 0 cost, it's often the most efficient way to play it is just kind of like actually playing it on its own and saying, here's 4 damage, answer this. That's not to say that we never swap it in particular, because we have access to 6 copies of Isolate, being able to kind of give your Leave No Witnesses dominate, as it were, by playing an Isolate, having them only able to block with 1 card, and then swapping in your Leave No Witnesses can be really powerful. But the most efficient line to be playing this is usually just to actually play it as it is, and leverage the power of these reactions like your shreds, your razor reflex, to try and actually get that damage through. And it interacts particularly well with Codex of Frailty, which is kind of a bit of an ancillary card, but I mean, this card is just nuts. What it does effectively is it cycles itself by creating a ponder token. So any effects that you get off the card, it's not even like you're spending a card to do it. You get to recur one of your most impactful attack actions, which with Codex of Frailty will often be a Death Touch or a Leave No Witnesses, sometimes a Command and Conquer, depending on how many resources you can leave floating, or a Surgical Extraction. You get to force your opponent to have an arsenal. So by recurring a Leave No Witnesses or a Command and Conquer, you say, you now have to have a card in your arsenal, so a target for me to banish, something for you to protect from those on-hit effects. And because it's very likely that your opponent has some number of cards in their hand, because it's pretty unlikely they've blocked with their entire hand, you're going to force them to discard a card, which weakens their ability to now protect the card that they've brought back. It is just absurdly powerful. Oh, and on top of that, they get a Frailty token, which, sure, sometimes it does nothing. But sometimes you put it against a ninja, and it's like, you can't use your Kodachis this turn.
Yeah, it's
And
just nuts, isn't it? The
it's
number of things this single card is doing, and it's
so many
like,
things.
and you know, you mentioned this, but it's even just the fact that you're bringing a card back from the grave. Like, you're not even using a card in, like, if you are going into a kind of fatiguey matchup, say you're coming up against an Oldhim that is trying to deck you out. You know, you're not even using another attack from your deck. You're using an attack from your grave, so you're maintaining the cards in your deck. It's absolutely nuts. It's a really cool card. I really love the interaction between this and Leave No Witnesses, because essentially this is just this is, you can just keep this as your last card, right? And
Yeah, your last
threaten.
card for the turn, and just go, Codex, I'll get
Yeah,
back Leave No Witnesses I played or blocked with earlier. You're going to have to put something in your arsenal. Have one less card in your hand to defend it with, unless you had none, in which case, okay, I'll just play my Leave No Witnesses. And now you're in
yeah.
this really awkward decision where, oh, do I want to defend it with my cards? Okay, I'll put down 2 cards. All right, cool. I took 3 cards out of your hand just by playing a Codex of Frailty. Maybe you got back an attack in your arsenal. Oh, but it's weakened anyway because you have a Frailty token. Oh my goodness gracious.
And I
What a
just
card.
wanted to touch on one of the interactions you mentioned, just in case anyone wasn't clear, with Isolate, and I'm presumably the reason why you run Rainbow Isolate is, you play the Isolate. It itself has Dominate, and a lot of the ways how player opponents are going to try and get around Uzuri's hero ability is to double block your stealth attack. Right, you come in for 3
absolutely.
with a stealth card. They're going to try and swap in something that's probably going to have 6 power, because that tends to be the power to cost, 2 cost to 6 power. That's the rate. But when you play in the Isolate, they can only block with 1 card from hand, so you can much more easily secure that on hit on your 6 attack, and it's just really, really strong effect there from that particular stealth one, and can let you set up kill turns as well to actually sort of kill your opponent. I mean, I guess as well, Shahmir, you can just play an Isolate out and then, play a reaction on top of the Isolate. You don't even need the, it's just a classic Dominate card, isn't it? It's just,
it's just 3 Dominate. And then 2 reactions later. No, actually, it's 9 Dominate, on hit, get a Bloodrot Pox, and go again. And it's, that's not so good for me. I think that takes us into our stealth cards a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, exactly. Let's talk about the stealth cards, because what I really like about this list is how tight you are with the stealth cards, and like you're actually only running 3 types of stealth, 3 variants of stealth cards. So 2 of those, it's just it's not the full package. You don't have 1 yellow infect, but like really talk through why you chose these 3 in particular to put in the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already said, Isolate is kind of like the best base for you to use as a stealth card, because while it has no on-hit itself, on-hits on stealth cards aren't usually what we care about. We care about making them kind of evasive somehow, so that when we swap in another card, it's already kind of done its job. As you said, with Isolate, preventing our opponent from blocking with more than 1 card, and then in the reaction step, we send in one of these massive attacks like Command and Conquer or Death Touch. Well, the Isolate actually contributed something to the efficacy of the thing that we swapped in. Whereas when you just play an Infect, they can block for 6, and then it's like, okay, the on-hit get a Bloodroot Pox doesn't matter, because I'm going to send the Infect to the bottom of my deck anyway. It's not the Infect that they're blocking, as it were. So Isolate is like the ultimate base for us. We're going to play 6 of it instantly, just because it's the strongest thing to do with Uzuri's reaction. Infect then is kind of like, we aren't always going to swap in with Uzuri, is the thing. That was the first thing that I came across, because if you try to just cram your deck full of stealth cards and things to swap in with Uzuri, you end up in an awkward spot sometimes where you're only drawing 1 of the given type, and drawing all stealth cards leaves you with a bunch of 3 power attacks in your hand that don't really do very much. Drawing all of your red big bonk cards leaves you with a very awkward hand where you probably have to pitch 2 reds to like play a Command and Conquer or something, or pitch 2 reds to play a Shakedown or a Humble or something. So to kind of reduce the variance of that, that's kind of where these reactions came in. Infect just has one of the most impactful on hits for a game of Blitz, where you're saying this Bloodrot Pox is going to deal 2 damage, take out 10% of your life total, unless you're giving me a whole card to prevent that damage by pitching a blue. So we went for the 2 reds and the 2 blues to kind of, I mean, that's the kind of standard heuristic of Flesh and Blood deck building, reds and blues. tend to be what we want first. We went with the 1 yellow because I wanted 1 additional stealth card in the deck, and Infect just feels really impactful for that purpose. And then the Sedates were a bit of an interesting one. I decided that I wanted 2 more blues in the deck, as just more ability to like deal with arcane damage, to be able to pitch for our daggers and things like that. But I wanted it to still be something that's quite impactful, because we've already got 2 blue isolate, 2 blue infect. What's the next best stealth card into this metagame? And I settled on Sedate because I think the blues are going to be most impactful when we play them. If we're playing out a blue stealth card, it's either saying I don't need a blue in my hand, or I already have another blue in my hand. In which point, this Sedate into like wizards is a blue that you can pitch to prevent arcane damage, or you can be playing it with an on hit that is actually threatening towards those wizards, in which case you're kind of forcing them to block, and then it makes for a really good base for all of your reaction cards, your Spike with Blood Rots and your Shreds, to get what is still just a tiny amount of damage, but a very important on hit in that matchup to go through. I could see an argument for maybe swapping out this yellow Infect for the first red Sedate, but I figured that Infect is still generally going to be more impactful, because the name of the game in Blitz is speed, still, even in this metagame, where you just want to take down your opponent as quickly as possible, and a Blood Rot Pox is really big towards being able to do that.
Yeah, I can see how these Sedates can be really awkward for like an Icelander player, for example, where they don't have a huge amount of equipment block and they probably want to be using it on your relevant on hits anyway. And then, you know, you play in this Sedate for 1 and they're really like, well, this is rough, because they don't want to lose their arsenal at all. So
trying to respect a reaction. Do I block it with 2 cards, trying to respect the Uzuri react? Do I not block it? Like, what's the correct line there?
It seems like super tight, and I think having and we are going to talk a little bit about how we might change things up if Icelander slips out of the meta. I haven't looked in great detail about what we're going to change, but you know, I know that the blue count does go down, but we can have a look at that in a bit. Let's just quickly talk about the defensive package. So you've got the 2 sigils and the 2 sink belows here.
So Sigil of Solace has kind of, I don't want to say a mainstay in Blitz, but it's been in Blitz for a long time, and I've really wanted to understand why it was. And I think the big thing is that against wizards, this is as good as a blue in many ways. The only situation where you like desperately want to be arcane barriering is where they have an on-hit effect, and that's why we still want a good blue count in the deck. But this gain 3 life is like the equivalent of preventing 3 damage in many situations. But where it's also really useful is kind of helping to keep a high life total when we're dealing with attacks that are coming at breakpoints or are really awkward to block. What I talk about kind of like blocking liquidity. So when a ninja comes at you with like Kodachi for 1, Kodachi for 2 from Ira, it's really inefficient for you to block the first Kodachi and the second Kodachi. Maybe you'll block the second one, but now they're leaking through 1 damage with the first one, and you're blocking the second one. So they've still dealt 1 damage despite you being down a card in blocking. Whereas with Sigil of Solace, you just get to go play that. You can have your Kodachi 1, Kodachi for 2. I've gained 3 life, you've dealt me 3 damage, so I'm net neutral on life. Despite still being down a card, I'm not down 1 life in addition. And against Dash, which was another kind of big consideration for me when I was building this deck, you don't want to be in a situation where it's like, I have to double block this, this high speed impact coming in for 4 with Go Again, because I don't care about the on hit, but I just can't afford to take the damage. But do you want to spend 2 cards blocking that? That's really inefficient. If you're doing that, then more damage is going to come later down the line. Instead, you can play a Sigil and be okay leaking 1 damage on an irrelevant on hit, because your Sigils are going to help you cover up those breakpoints, as it were. And Sync kind of goes with the same margin, where when we're playing against these physical heroes, Sync Below is going to give us the ability to cover up a breakpoint while fixing a hand, and still provide some respect to like warriors who are still running around with lots of attack reactions, and a defense reaction is just really strong against them to have, especially from Arsenal.
I think as well, you've got one of the things I really like about Assassin and Uzuri is it's just the sheer number of three blocks in the deck. And having the sinks and a 3 block, being able to shut down a attack for 7 can be really impactful, especially in the late game. If you're on the back foot and you're trying to keep cards in hand, often the opponent will try and push 7 damage or 4 damage in order to force that extra card out of your hand, which ultimately costs you the game. And I guess as well, and obviously your deck's built clearly very well, but having a bit of, being able to fix a hand can be pretty nice in a deck that does rely a little bit on things like, you want to have your stealth card and your swapping card, or your stealth card and your reaction. And, there are going to be situations where things don't quite align the way you want. And then that situation, a sync can really save a turn for you.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And also, I guess with Sigil, sometimes you just draw it going first and you start the game with 23 life, which is...
it's a fantastic card, because as Uzuri, you will generally want to go second and try and take tempo with some of these really powerful on-hits, force lots of cards out of your opponent's hand. So getting a Sigil where you get to go second and have a Sigil on turn 0, it's like, okay, just gain 3 life. Are you going to still try and attack me, or are you just going to pass and Arsenal and cool, I start with 3 extra?
Because a lot of people don't attack going first these days. They just try to, maybe build some value if they're a Rune Blade, build a Rune Chant and Arsenal, or they try to pitch things in a way so they can clear their hand out. They're not trying to push a huge amount of damage. They're just trying to correct their own hand and secure the Arsenal. And you're very rarely blocking with 4 cards, especially against good players. They often won't, give you the space to essentially get a mulligan. But if you've got the Sigil, it allows you to essentially mulligan 1 card and gain 3 life, which is really, really good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the reactions. We kind of touched on this a little bit when we were talking about Shred and Spike, but what's the kind of role of... firstly, what's the role of Spike with Blood Rot? I think that's actually something to cover first before we talk about Shred.
Yeah. Spike with Blood Rot is... I almost would classify it as seeing the middle ground between your reactions and your big bonk, because it is just designed to work on a stealth card, but it in itself is contributing a lot of damage in the fact, because it's +3, which is a 1-for-3 reaction. That's Dorinthia's right, whatever. But on hit, create a Blood Rot Pox is an additional 2 damage, if they're not preventing it. Or if they are, it's a whole extra card out of their hand. So we're looking at kind of this 1-for-5 style reaction, which is actually really, really powerful. And at that point, if you have a Spike with Blood Rot in your hand, you're not too worried about maybe not having a Command and Conquer or not having a Death Touch. This is just extra damage, which combos really well with cards like Isolate for making sure that, okay, maybe... if you get to the late game and your isolates end up on the bottom of your deck because you've been activating Uzuri, which sends them to the bottom of the deck. Now your Spike with Blood Rots pair with them really, really well to be able to force that extra bit of damage over, just end the game on the spot, which is a really big deal. The Shreds are kind of much more multifunctional. And the reason why I've taken the yellows and blues is that they kind of feel like they scale the best for the format. So obviously they get to contribute to our resource base, where even the yellow pitches to a full dagger swing, or pitches to a situation where we're saying, like, playing a Death Touch and then playing a Razor Reflex on top of it, or something like that. But it's still also giving -3 to a card, where most cards in this game that your opponent's blocking with are going to block for 3 or less. Whereas the red Shred giving -4, I mean, yes, that's good if you come across a lot of defense reactions, but again, that's kind of not what I was anticipating in this format. So I decided to go with the yellows and blues. Importantly, the way it interacts with the stealth cards and Uzuri's ability is really worth noting, because if I say play out an Infect at my opponent and they block with 2 cards for 6, I can't play a Spike with Blood Rot and then swap in a Command and Conquer, because the Spike with Blood Rot gets applied to the Infect, not the card that I swap in. Which critically means that, if they block for 6, my Command and Conquer is still going to get fully blocked. Yeah. But with a Shred, I can play my Infect, they block for 6, I can Shred one of them before activating Uzuri's ability, which negates its block, so they're now blocking for 3, and then activate Uzuri, swapping out the Infect for one of the big bonk cards that lets us, still get 3 damage over the top and that on-hit ability. So Shred just interacts really, really well with Uzuri. I could see reasons for going up to more copies if you think you're playing into a very defensive metagame with lots of defense reactions, but that's not what I really anticipated. So we went with these because of how well they interact with just the whole suite of cards in the deck.
I think the problem at the moment as well is the heroes that are running a huge amount of defense reactions are also running a lot of cards that... well, not a lot of cards, but run a fair number of cards that prevent damage, where your Shred is not going to, your Shred's not going to do anything to an Oasis Respite, right? So there's a bit of a risk of going too heavy on the shreds there.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I really liked, and I saw this on stream a few times, check out, the Armory Knights channel for some streams of some Uzuri games through the Skirmish season. And the reason why I really like these yellows and blues is because they're kind of just they're a pitch card, right? And what a fantastic card to come out on the last turn of the game than the card that essentially when your opponent is most likely to be blocking, and it's a card that punishes a block, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it really lets you set up a kill turn in a not too complicated way. We're not talking about mega pitch stacking here. We're talking about, you want to pitch these cards anyway. You don't have to think about it too much. But it's going to come up in the late game and potentially win you the game. So that I really like.
Yeah, precisely. The last reaction is just the one of Razor Reflex.
Yeah.
And this card is just the two things that it can really target and be supremely powerful with are Leave No Witnesses and Death Touch. I think one of my favorite things about Razor Reflex is that, like I said earlier, Leave No Witnesses is a card that generally you're just going to play face up. You're not going to swap it in. So your opponent knows what's coming. They know they have to block 4 damage because that's what you presented in front of them. They probably don't know that they have to block 7 damage because you had the Razor Reflex up. That's then going to destroy their arsenal and a card from the top of the deck and let you gain go again and extend your turn even further. And it's a similar deal with the Death Touch, where sometimes it's going to be a situation where it's like, okay, I have a Death Touch in Arsenal because I didn't want to swap it in last turn. Oh, look, I'll start my turn pitching this blue with a Death Touch. I was like, what's going on there? Are you trying to use your Snapdragons on it? Are you trying to use your Black Tech Whisperers on it? I guess I'll block 6 here. Nope, Razor, over the top. And now extend your turn, get that on hit, and keep going. It is just a ridiculously powerful card with those two in particular. And it has the added benefit of still targeting all of your stealth cards. So being able to push an Infect through and really get that Blood Rot Pox to trigger. Pushing through damage over the top with Dominate on an Isolate. And even just the classic, the Welcome to Wraith classic of Enlightened Strike, draw a card. With Snapdragons up, I'll no blocks. You're probably doing more here. Razor.
I just love Razor. I mean, you've even you could even play it on a dagger, can't you? I mean,
you can.
You want to be getting your, you want to be flicking knives, but you still got that option available to you to just, if they're just you swing with a dagger and they've actually got the cards in hand that they feel like they can still block out. So they just don't block it, and then Razor push a bunch of damage.
Razor for lethal.
Yeah, Razor for lethal. It's
Razor for lethal.
And another thing I noticed about the deck, which I think is quite interesting, is how well the Razor and the Spike of Blood Rot sort of synergizes with just the single resource from Vindel Spring Tunic, because your resource cost, if you're not swinging a dagger, and if you even are swinging a dagger with a blue, is very low, and you don't have a huge number of uses for that tunic resource. So you've got it there available if you want to play the Spike or the Razor. It's essentially a 0 cost because you're not really needing that one resource for much else. That's the way it appears to me. I guess you want to use it. I was about to say you want to use it for flick knives, thinking flick knives cost 1, but no, it is that good that it costs 0. So you don't even need it for flick knives.
Yeah, I mean, the power of Tunic in this deck is really that it helps you cover up where a lot of other kind of costs, total costs for a turn would be kind of awkward. As you said, there's plenty of turns in Uzuri where you actually just don't pitch and still do something really impactful. I can have a 2-card hand of Isolate and Command and Conquer, and I'm not pitching that turn. I just go Isolate, swap in a Command and Conquer. It can be any of them, even a 2-red hand of Red Isolate, Command and Conquer, will still be able to play that line, requiring no pitch and still threatening this really powerful on-hit. But on the turns on which you do pitch, you will usually be paying 2 for a dagger, which is either the entirety of a yellow card, okay, fine, or a blue card with 1 resource floating. What can you do with that 1 floating resource now? Well, I can Tunic and end up with 2 floating resources and either swing the second dagger or just come in straight away with one of these big bonk cards if I don't have a stealth card in my hand. Or if I want to use that 1 resource floating, I can just present an Infect, and now I'm threatening my Spike with Blood Rots and my Razor Reflex. The cost curve was really designed to be you can use Tunic in a wide variety of ways, and you're going to let it charge up on the turns where you're just not pitching, because you're just going stealth card, boom, stealth card, boom.
Yeah, I think it's a really it makes me feel like, because obviously we talked very briefly about how there is the assassin legendary, the -1 on an attack reaction, but I feel like, Tunic here, if you get more than 2 uses out of it, you've got real clear obvious uses for that Tunic resource that's going to really impact the game, and having a couple of them could be really good. I just wanted to talk a little bit about your sort of, there's no, every game plays differently. Every opponent, every hero you play against is going to present different threats, different options. Is it kind of a block with 2, attack with 2 kind of deck? Is that kind of the average turn you're working for? Using 2 of your cards to block with, keeping an isolate and a bonk card. Is that kind of your average play pattern, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
I think it really depends on your matchup. But one of the reasons why the kind of pitch of the deck and the card choices of the deck is the way that it is that you should be able to be very flexible, playing anything from a 2-card hand up to, even a 1-card hand, all the way up to a 4 and 5 card hand. Because your 2-card hands, your most straightforward 2-card hand is, as you say, just stealth attack and something I want to swap it in with. Or even stealth attack with a reaction in my hand and Tunic up to be able to pay for it. Your 1-card hands are like your Leave No Witnesses and your Codex of Frailty, which suddenly just become power turns out of nowhere on a 1-card hand.
Yeah.
But your 4 and 5 card hands can be a situation where you're swinging both daggers, which suddenly makes your opponent's blocking really awkward. That's actually the beauty of the daggers. It's not the 1 damage that they deal. It's that when they hit, and they're very likely to hit because they're awkward, super awkward to block, they reduce the efficacy of your opponent's blocking for almost the entire turn, it feels like. It is just the next time, but by the time they start blocking, chances are that's the only thing they're blocking this turn. So it really negates their blocks for the entire turn in many ways. And that kind of also leads us into Enlightened Strike a little bit, where this was, E-Strike is just an incredibly modal card, where on your 2-card hands, this can be, I'll maintain an arsenal and come in for 5. Or it can be, I'll be 7 damage on a 3-card hand and maintain an arsenal. Or on a 4 and 5 card, I can be, here's 5 go again, and then a dagger, and then stealth card threatening to swap something in with Uzuri. It kind of feels like the glue that holds the deck together in a lot of ways, because it lets you do anything from your 5-card hand down to your 2-card hand and 1-card hand.
Amazing. Well, I think we've covered the sideboard, we've covered the main deck, and we've briefly discussed kind of like play patterns. I don't want to get stuck too much into the matchups, because I think now would actually be a good time to discuss the other list that we've brought along today, well, that you've brought along today, I should say, which is for a post-ice world. Now, as we mentioned at the start of the video, it's highly likely that Icelander and Oldhim are going to be living legend out of the Blitz meta. They are both on the cusp of 500 points, and it's quite likely that both will be gone. So, Shahmir, you actually brought with you a brand new list, which was essentially your kind of, I guess it's fair to say, sort of like your first sort of musings of what that new meta might be like and what it might mean for Uzuri. So, shall we move on to that list? And maybe while we do that, you can talk a bit about what went through your mind when you were thinking, right, Icelander and Oldhim are going to be gone soon. What can I change to sort of match this new meta that's coming for Blitz?
So the first step for me was figuring out, what improves, what other decks suddenly really become top tier when Icelander and Oldhim leave. And when those 2 heroes leave, it kind of feels like the only hero left who can play a card like Channel Lake Frigid is Lexi, who, for a number of reasons, is struggling in Blitz generally. Not to say that she can't compete, but she has kind of core issues with the format that stop her from competing really well as a ranger. And we're also going to see a lot less kind of disruption besides Channel Lake Frigid, because the regular Frostbite that was coming from Winter's Wail in Oldhim's case, and from an Ice card played from Arsenal in Icelander's case, Blizzard leaving the format, we're generally going to see a lot less disruption going on, which I think leaves the field very open to aggro decks that have otherwise been quite suppressed. Like, I think the decks that I anticipate seeing doing really well in the next metagame are Dash, who's now capable of just presenting these ridiculously high damage turns at the cost of just burning away her own deck. but that's not a problem if her opponent's dead by the time she burns the last card, right? Chain, who, I mean, frankly, I think it's a miracle that Chain's even still in this format. He's still a ridiculously high power hero with access to some absurdly powerful equipment. I seriously doubt he will survive much longer past the next season unless there's something big that I'm missing. And we could even see ninjas making a really big return here. I mean, Katsu's gotten a really big boost out of outsiders. Fi is still, despite not having access to Master of the Pouncing Lanes, capable of going ridiculously wide and putting on a lot of pressure that way. So those are kind of the decks that I see doing really well in a format with a lot less disruption going on with it. Of course, we might see reactions where, like, now maybe Rangers start doing well because their on-hits really matter, but Fridges tend to counter Ranger on-hits really well. Yeah. We'll also see, because these aggro decks go up, the decks that were kind of designed to prey on Oldhim and Icelander that really fold to the aggro decks, notably Prism, is like, I think Prism's going to crash out of the meta really hard because her two big kind of like sources of prey are basically gone. And now when you're playing against Dash, the kind of damage that Dash can output will go over the top of you. Same, quite possibly same with Chain, almost certainly the same with Fi. So if we're competing now in an aggro metagame, I think I want to, one, increase the number of times where I could play out a 5-card hand that would do lots of damage. Uzuri is still really comfortable blocking, and I didn't want to entirely forsake the power of blocking in the deck, but I wanted to be able to race more effectively, because there's certainly times where like you go up against, say, Chain, who's not necessarily presenting a lot of on-hits, and you just need to actually be able to keep up with the damage that they output, because unless you plan on fatiguing him, which is a very tall order, even in Blitz, you need to be able to just keep up on damage output, and that means you want more reds in your deck, more actual damage output in your deck to be able to keep up with him. We could also see the number of blues go down because Ice is pretty much gone from the meta, except for Lexi. And with Icelander going, I think there is a chance that we see Kano take some kind of hit, either from a ban or just generally, not performing quite as well with all of this aggro coming out to face him. So we don't have to respect arcane damage quite as much either. I mean, we still have the space for 3 arcane barrier, which is great. We can add that. But now we don't have to worry about, having tons of blues in our deck. So a lot of the core that we're playing is still very much the same. I mean, the equipment suite is practically identical. The only change that I've made, with light of the fact that both Oldhim is leaving, and I suspect Prism gets a fair bit worse into the next metagame, is I subbed out the Snapdragon Scalers for Nerve Scalpel, which is going to feel really good into Dorinthia, who's probably another big winner from the Living Legending, and Kasai, who's just a pretty classic mainstay at this point, still a very powerful deck. Besides that, we've seen the Death Touches go from blue to yellow, just because I wanted the ability to just output a little bit more damage, make sure that those on-hits are a little bit more likely to get through, while still maintaining the rough kind of pitch cost of the deck. It's still a card that pitches for a dagger. Ravenous Rabbles getting added in is a pretty big change. Rabble, I think, is a card that people have realized generally interacts quite well with an Uzuri that is mostly red and yellow, because Red Rabble should be coming in for 3, if not 4, the majority of the time, which is really quite strong. 0 for 4 go again is a great rate to be at. And I think the last kind of really significant change was that I went away from using Sedate as kind of my last stealth card of choice to moving to Wither, because I anticipate these kind of go wide aggro decks, particularly ninjas and warriors. Well, warriors being go tall, but both of those classes rather are affected by Wither, because you get to negate the power of Kodachis out of the ninjas, and you get to make the Dawnblade or the Centauri Sabers significantly more blockable or low power out of Dorinthia and Kasai. The Spreading Plague's in here. I've heard really good things about Spreading Plague in Blitz.
Yeah, me too.
It is such a cool card. I don't know whether it fulfills the roles that we want it to, but at the moment I'm kind of treating it as a replacement Blue Shred almost, where it's a card that pitches really well, still blocks for 3, and in the late game where you're forcing your opponent to like block with multiple cards to try and play around an Uzuri reaction or the attack reactions left in your deck, you just go, boop, Spreading Plague, you have 3 Blood Rots now, and it's like, Well, I suppose I blocked for 9 and still leaked 6 damage. Sucks to be
Yeah,
me.
I think that's the thing with it, isn't it? Is that if people are playing the Uzuri game of, okay, I'll just 2 block your stealth card, you play out the spreading plague, and suddenly you're playing a one cost deal 4 that's a yellow, right? That
Yeah.
feels pretty good. And sometimes it just goes crazy and they throw an equipment piece and 2 cards, and then suddenly they're taking 6 damage. It's a really interesting card because it could do nothing against certain heroes if they're just not blocking, and it's in your hand at the wrong time, and you just have to pitch it away or just block with it. But it has such great potential and very metal art as well. So why not?
Oh yeah, I mean,
I wanted
but
to
yeah, I
just
think
touch on something, Shahmir, which was the other thing I really like about Rabble that people may not be aware of if you haven't played a lot of Outsiders yet, is that you can swap in Rabble with Uzuri's ability, and then you actually don't get the minus power at all. So it can actually, if you're swapping in Rabble with Uzuri, it's just a 0 for 5 with Go Again, which is pretty great rate, mate. So can allow you to go a little bit wide and do something quite clever with that, which is kind of fun too.
yeah, that's a really good fake out play where you start your turn with like stealth card, and they go, okay, you're not swinging daggers at all, so your hand must be like full of reactions for the stealth card, or like a lot of swap in targets.
Yeah.
Block 6 here. Okay, swap in. It's a Rabble. Okay, it didn't deal any damage, but I've got Go Again. And now I'll swing the Command and Conquer that's in my hand, and you've only got 2 cards left in your hand. And they go, didn't like that.
Yeah, really nice. It's almost like it's like giving your stealth card Go Again, just for free, right? It's like your hero ability is give this particular stealth card Go Again, which is by swapping the Rebel in. So that's really nice. And I think I had a quick look at the numbers. We can have a look at the breakdown. We know we're down to 7 blue cards before you were on 12. So it is a real reduction in the number of blue cards. But I think that's an accurate reflection of, having to run those blue cards before was probably holding back, a little bit what you want to be doing with this deck. Like we were saying with Tunic, it's great to swing a dagger, don't get me wrong, but actually you can do a lot without any resources, and the blues were in there to pay your frostbite tax, pay your channel like frigid tax, allow you to do your turns. If that moves out the meta, it's allowed you to go much harder, like you're saying with the death touch, being able to swap that up from a blue to a yellow. People who haven't played a huge amount of Flesh and Blood might think, well, what difference is that going to make going up from a 4 to a 5, right? It can make a huge difference. It makes a huge difference.
1 point of damage.
In 20 health format, that is 20th of your health. It does add up. There's reasons why these +1 attack reactions can have such an impact sometimes. And I'm really excited to see how this deck performs in the sort of new meta. Obviously, Skirmish season is over, but Blitz is such a big armory format that a lot of people are playing. And what would you say to someone, Shahmir, who's watched this video and is thinking, I really want to take this deck to my next armory? Like, what would you say to them, to someone who's considering this deck amongst the many other options that are available to them in Flesh and Blood at the moment?
I'd say if you're someone who loves playing mind games, because Uzuri is really good at that, who loves giving your opponent really awkward decisions about, what the correct line of play is, and who loves having lots of options in the way that you can play out your hand, which Flesh and Blood is brilliant at, but Uzuri in particular is so good at pursuing different lines with the cards in her hand. Uzuri is a really fantastic pick. Jump right in with her, because I think she's still being very much discovered in what she can do in both Blitz and Classic Constructed. And the more people we've got playing her, the quicker we're going to figure out what's the real way to crack her open. I'm hoping this is it.
Incredible. We're gonna have to wrap it up there because we've been recording for a little while already. But what I would say is that, and I'm sure I haven't asked Shahmir this yet, but I'm sure he'll say yes, which is that if you do have any questions about the deck, if you have any, if you want a particular understanding of a certain matchup, if you're coming up against a lot of one hero and you'd like advice about whether, ways you might want to tweak it to combat a particular hero that you're struggling with, stick that in the comments below this video and we'll get an answer for you. But I just want to sum up by saying a huge thanks, Shahmir, for being on the channel again. We've had you on before. I'm sure we'll have you on again soon. We've got some ideas around potentially doing a bit of a Blitz roundtable, talking about what's going to come up in the meta. So watch this space. That might be on the channel soon. But just to sum up and say huge thanks for coming along, Shahmir. I hope you've enjoyed talking through this incredible deck.
It's my pleasure as always, Trip. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.